Committee will be in order, and I want to welcome each of you today to this important hearing, H.R. 933, the Defense Department Military Construction and Veterans Affairs, and full-year continuation Appropriations Act of 2013. And I would thank both of our witnesses who are here today, expert witnesses, for taking time not only to come to the Rules Committee and to make themselves available. I also recognize that some of what we're going to do today, notwithstanding I have yet to speak with the ranking member, Mrs. Slaughter, but a storm is headed our way, and a snowstorm. And as we speak today, what we're trying to do is to get this quickly to the floor of the House of Representatives. I'm not going to ask that you change your testimony in any way, but with a recognition that this committee is here to hear your testimony, with an understanding that what we're trying to do is to move expeditiously. And so as members are watching this, it gives them and their staffs an opportunity to know that we are going to move rather quickly on the important legislation that we have here today. I want to thank both Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Lowy for successfully completing what I think has been a difficult task of working not just together but toward an effort that was the same effort, and that is to give this body an opportunity to speak clearly about producing a proposal to fund the federal government for the remainder of the year, to make sure that fiscal constraints are properly taken care of, but also that we give the certainty to the American people that we are doing our job, that we're working well together, and fulfilling our responsibilities with fewer resources, as we know, with sequestration, is painful and harder. With that said, millions of hardworking American families have done these same things over the past few years as the economic times have placed hurdles in front of them and obstacles that they have to meet, and we did not shirk our responsibility either. The continuing resolution before us is important. It includes bipartisan and bicameral agreements, which we're going to hear about today, which I have been dealing with the gentleman, the chairman of the committee, now for months on, and he kept me updated and told me constantly of the progress that he was making, the hurdles that needed to be gone over, and I am very pleased that we're going to fund defense and veterans programs. We're going to live within our means, but we're going to make sure that military readiness is not taken advantage of. National security capacities and other things are important, but so are our troops and our mission, and our ability to make sure that we speak clearly as a Congress. So I believe the legislation before us today accomplishes many things that speak clearly to the American people and looking for leadership in Washington that both of you have and are providing. With this measure, we're going to move beyond the FY13 funding issues and devote our efforts to developing a budgetary roadmap into the future. I think it'll lay the foundation for us to continue working together, and we know that there are other pieces of the budget that need to be dealt with. Dealing seriously with them is always important. Two things, then I'm going to get us going in the hearing. Number one, it's important that we recognize that the Honorable Bill Young, who is not here yet, but Bill, who has added his years of service to this great body and is the Appropriations Subcommittee Chairman for Defense, is expected to be here today, and I want to make sure that if he chooses to be heard from, that we do that. But I want to offer full support of what Chairman Rogers has done to make sure that the men and women of the military, through Bill Young and through both of you, have been heard. Next, that there have been issues that have been brought up in the media, have been brought up by my conference, your conference, Mr. Chairman, where people are questioning What is sequestration going to do? When does it fall? What does it do? I think you've been very clear publicly and privately to state what the answer is. So I instructed my staff to make sure that I could say that under the joint explanatory statement, Section 3002, it indicates that the sequestration under Section 251A, Part 7A of the Balanced Budget Emergency Deficit Control Act of 1985 is applied to the amounts provided in the Act. That would mean that, notwithstanding where we are, sequestration, it falls first, and then the net, which we are dealing with, then occurs. Lastly, a very dear friend of mine, and we welcome people to the committee on a regular basis, but a very dear friend of mine and gentleman sits on the board of Southwestern University, where I went to school and where he went to school. I had lunch today, Blake Stanford, with the Southwest Human Development Services board. It's in essence, it's a food bank in Austin, Texas. And he cares much about the farm bill and was speaking with me about that, but he's speaking clearly about helping people who need our help. And Blake, I want to thank you for being here today. If you put your hand up, people in the committee can see you. Blake Stanford, my honored and dear guest. We were not fraternity brothers, but in fraternity houses right next to each other. And Judge, I will let you guess accordingly how much fun we had when we were in school. I do not see our ranking member at this time, but I would yield to the gentleman if he would wish to make a statement on behalf of the minority.
No, Mr. Chairman, I think we should get right to the testimony.
Well, we'll just go to that. Both of you, Mr. Rogers, Ms. Lowy, welcome to the Rules Committee. As each of you know from your testimony that you've given on a regular basis, that we will take without objection any written statement that you have, and would wish that you to be acknowledged at this time. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you much for the welcome here. This is the first chance that Ms. Lowy and I have had to work together. The new ranking member of the...
Mr. Chairman, is your microphone turned on there?
Let me get closer to it. First chance that Ms. Lowy and I have had a chance to work together. The new ranking member of the committee, the first female ranking member of our committee. And I've known Ms. Lowy for a long time on the committee and otherwise, and I'm delighted with her ascension to this platform. And we will work together even as her predecessor, Norm Dixon, and I did. We have a commitment to get back to regular order, to pass individual bills, and to allow members the chance, therefore, to avoid a CR and be able to debate the individual merits of each bill. That's our goal. Mr. Chairman, we're here today, as you have said, to present this bill, a continuing resolution, to provide funding for the balance of this fiscal year until September 30, and to provide a full year appropriation for the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs. As you know, the current 6-month CR expires March 27, so we've got to move quickly, get it over to the Senate, and ultimately onto the White House. As you know, the White House has indicated it does not want a government shutdown, and we all agree on that principle. Consequently, Mr. Chairman, I would request an appropriate rule to bring this bill to the floor. The bill continues current funding levels as set out by the Budget Control Act. However, sequestration, as you know, is now in effect, and the levels in this bill are subject to those reductions. Therefore, the effective funding level in this bill is about $984 billion, as required by the President's sequestration order. H.R. 933 has 3 main parts: to protect our national security and ensure that our troops and veterans receive quality care. The package provides full-year appropriations for defense, military construction, and Veterans Affairs. These bills were the ones that we passed through the House back in December with a hefty bipartisan vote, and then agreed to by the Senate Appropriation Committee. fully negotiated on a bipartisan and bicameral basis in December that will provide DOD with some leeway to do the best it can with the funding that is given to it subject to sequestration. And of course, continuing appropriations funding is included for the remainder of the government. Without this bill, the Pentagon could face serious funding shortfalls that, when combined with sequestration, would have serious and potentially harmful repercussions in our national security interests. We had the testimony of all of the Joint Chiefs before our committee 2 days ago. Ms. Lowy and I had a chance to question them, along with others. All of them said that it's absolutely critical that we pass this bill. And they expressed very strong public support for this CR package. The bill makes critical investments in our national security, protecting core functions like operations to help ensure the continued readiness of our military. For VA, the bill provides about a $2.5 billion increase to make sure we continue to do our best to take care of our veterans. What we're doing with this legislation is right-sizing our military and veteran spending to ensure funding goes where it's best and most effectively used. In addition, we made specific technical changes only where absolutely necessary to prevent catastrophic, irreversible changes to programs and to ensure good shepherding of taxpayer dollars, the so-called anomalies. For instance, we've allowed additional funding for embassy security in light of the Benghazi attacks, offset by a reduction in other spending, and we've worked to ensure that critical law enforcement functions, including Border Patrol and FBI, are continued. We've also extended the federal pay raise, which, as you know, a pay freeze, which, as you know, has effectively frozen the pay of you and me and every member of Congress, along with other employees. In addition, I've submitted a very technical amendment that I would ask the committee to include in the rule. The amendment simply adds the required appropriating clause to Division B of the bill, which was inadvertently left out some days ago. It's abundantly clear that this nation is facing some very hard choices when it comes to how to deal with our finances. It's up to Congress to pave the way for our financial future. But right now, this bill is absolutely necessary if we're to avoid a government shutdown. We must show our people that we can do what is best for our country, keeping the government's lights on, funding essential federal programs and services, and helping maintain our national security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Your words fall on ears that are eager to hear that the men and women of our troops, their families, as well as veterans, will be included and taken care of properly. Ms. Lowe, you're now right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to appear today, but I do wish we could have reached a different outcome on the fiscal year 2013 spending bills and sequestration. It is unconscionable to me that Congress allowed those cuts to go into effect March 1st, and they will have a staggering effect. I want to also emphasize that I was at the hearing of the Defense Subcommittee of Appropriations, and every single chief of every single service, led by General Odierno, etc., made it absolutely clear that the sequester would be a disaster for the military. I want to say this again. I'm very pleased that the Defense Subcommittee and the MILCON Subcommittee had some discretion when the chair decided to include the FY13 levels. But each of these people made it clear that the sequester would be a disaster for them. Now, I understand that Chairman Rogers faces a very difficult task. However, I do regret that we find ourselves here today with a package that really only addresses the needs of two agencies, the Defense Department and the Veterans Administration, while leaving every other program and agency operating under last year's guidelines. In particular, operating under last year's funding levels will delay implementation of the Affordable Care Act, will obstruct enforcement of the Dodd-Frank Act, will underfund Head Start, child care, public housing operating funds. In addition, the bill hinders NHTSA's efforts to develop technology to detect and prevent drunk driving and denies the requested increases to control healthcare fraud and abuse. Nearly everything in these bills faces the deep, indiscriminate cuts from sequestration, including the Department of Defense. The President will sign a bill that addresses key priorities across all of the appropriation bills, whether that means full bills or additional anomalies. The White House has made clear, however, that they do not favor the House approach. Our colleagues in the Senate have great hopes about amending this package by attaching several other bills in place of the CR and including additional anomalies. We all hope they will succeed. I want to conclude with an important thought. Chairman Rogers and I have known each other for quite a few years. We've served on the Appropriations Committee together for many years. I was listening to Morning Joe on MSNBC. I don't know how many of you wake up in the morning and turn up Morning Joe. A distinguished former member of Congress and of the Republican persuasion. And he said, "It's time for the Appropriations Committee to get back to work. There is no question in my mind that if Chairman Rogers and I sat down with input from all of the ranking members of the committee, we could write a bill that wouldn't have these real cuts, that would make sure we're doing justice to defense, to MILCON, and all the other major needs in our community. I mentioned Head Start, pre-K, community health centers, etc. So I hope that day will come, Mr. Chairman, when we could sit down, as we used to, and really constructively put together an appropriations bill that we can be proud of, that we know won't be subject to a sequester, which is just blindly cutting across. And lastly, I want to repeat what I said before. At the defense hearing, the Subcommittee on Defense, every service made it clear that the sequester would be a disaster for them. And General Odierno made the point that he joined the service when our military was hollowed out. He never thought that this could happen again. Thank you. I look forward to the time when we can continue to work together and put together a bill without a sequester that we can all be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Lowy, thank you very much. You know, the place we find, each of us find ourselves in our country is a difficult one. And as we work together and work through these tasks, it is important to see that your leadership, along with Chairman Rogers, along with the Honorable C.W. Bill Young, who has now joined us. Bill, we were talking about you a few minutes ago. It is a great honor to have you with us today, and thank you for taking time to come up here in the rare air of the Rules Committee to join us once again. You buoy us with not only your leadership but your presence today. Each of us are dealing with circumstances that I think none of us wish we were. The facts of the case are that we are spending money that we borrow. And when you borrow money to run the operations, whether it's a family or whether it's a business or whether it's a government, at some point you got to pay it back. Our government will spend around $275 billion a year that we will pay on interest. And in a normal year, where interest rates were different, that could move to $500 billion a year. And this means that my children and others will have a diminished opportunity to have freedom and to make the American dream work. So this member is no different than any member up here. We wish we weren't in this role, but we are. And so I can say that you too have faced up, come up here and given us a direction, albeit with a great headlamp for a future. I'm glad we're able to come to an agreement to move forward. And as Chairman Rogers said, he's tried to negotiate this on a bipartisan, bicameral basis, and we'll see how we do. Thanks to both of you. Dr. Fox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for coming today, and I know that you all have done a lot of work along with the staff to get us to this place so that we can keep the government funding. Ms. Lowy, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you about the fact that the sequester is not good for the defense of this nation. But I want, if you haven't read Bob Woodward's book, and I hope that you will, let me tell you, page 326, on July 26, this is a quote, direct quote from the Bob Woodward book. At 2:30 p.m., White House Budget Director Jack Lew and White House Legislative Affairs Director Rob Neighbors went to the Senate to meet with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and his Chief of Staff David Crone. We have an idea for the trigger, Lew said. What's the idea, Reid said. Skeptically, Reid asked skeptically, sequestration. So I hope that you have taken your pleas to the President and to his staff.
Will the gentlelady yield for a quick question?
Not yet. I just
It's
started.
relevant to the point you just made.
I just,
Gentlewoman choose to yield?
after I've,
Gentlewoman is recognized.
thank you. So I hope very much that you have made your appeal to the President, because we certainly have made that appeal, and I think you know that we passed 2 bills last year to stop the sequester and to make what we thought were sensible, smart, common sense cuts. And we just haven't been able to get bipartisan support for those. So I think it's very important that the American people understand this is the President's sequester. This is not the Republicans of the House sequester. Yes, some of us voted for it. I don't know if that's what my colleague's going to ask, but like many other people, we had hoped it would never get to this point. But the idea came from the President. I tell school groups when I meet with them all the time, the #1 role of the federal government is the defense of this nation. Every other thing that we do from the federal level, practically, can be done at the state and local levels, but not defense. And if we don't have a strong defense and we're not kept a free people, the rest of it, frankly, doesn't matter much. Because if we're not free, we can't do the other things. So I appreciate your appeal. I appreciate your concerns about defense. And I believe they are wholeheartedly felt on your part. But I think that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are directing their concerns to the wrong people. Because I think it's the other side of the aisle that needs to pay attention to where we are. And with that, I would yield to my colleague from Massachusetts.
I would just point out to the gentlelady that Thomas Mann and Norm Ornstein have put out a piece that actually discredits the Bob Woodward book. And the other thing, did the gentlelady tell me that she just say that she voted for the bill that included the sequester?
I believe I did.
Yeah, well, you know what I tell school kids is that there's a separation of powers. You got the executive and you got the legislative branch. And here in the legislative branch, we can say yes or we can say no. So you voted for the sequester, so I would say to the gentlelady that she owns it. And the fact that we are here at this point, basically in a state of dysfunction is representative of the lack of leadership here in the House of Representatives. I thank the gentlelady for yielding, but I wanted to point out that her definitive remark is about the President is not so definitive.
Reclaiming my time, I realize that we have a separation of powers and that we have three branches of government, and I would say to you that the House is only half of the Congress. The White House is controlled by Democrats. The Senate is controlled by Democrats. The Republicans in the House are not in a state of dysfunction. We passed bills last year twice asking that this be taken care of, and they were not, and it was not taken care of. All the President would need to do would be to ask the Senate to pass the bill that the House sent over, or to pass their own bill. We're still waiting for the Senate to pass a bill and send it to us so we can go to conference.
Well, the gentlelady said she voted for the sequester. That means she must support the sequester if she voted for it. If she didn't, she would have voted against it.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
If I may respond, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Fox, if I recall, I'm not sure if that's the vote that my friend Mr. McGovern is talking about, but I believe there was a vote for the sequester in the summer of 2011 in the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, so that this is a Republican priority. I think it's important, secondly, to make the point, because I think we're adults and we all care about the long-term debt and we care about the deficit. I have 3 children. I have 8 grandchildren. I don't know how many you have, but we were talking about it. And I do worry about our children in the future. But we did pass the Budget Control Act, which took $1 trillion in the long-term debt, $1 trillion over the 10 years, over the decade, and also put cap of $555 billion on discretionary spending. And I also want to make it clear, as I know the chairman and I worry about this, that discretionary dollars as a percentage of the GDP, the gross domestic product, as a percentage of the economy, is at its lowest level in the last 45 years. So we do cut. And I guess there's a difference in philosophy, because I believe we have to decrease the long-term debt. But I also believe that putting people to work, investing in infrastructure, making sure we deal with our roads, our bridges, our highway, is the way to do it. So the sequester cut that was part of the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, I don't think is a responsible way for legislators to legislate.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Might I say, sequestration is one thing. Continuing resolution is another. We're here about the continuing resolution. And sequestration is upon us, and we'll have to deal with that, but not now. This bill is only about keeping the government operating for the balance of the year, and I would hope we could stay with that.
Well, first of all, I agree with the gentleman, but, you know, in reference to the political remarks that have been made that are very appropriate in this context, let us remember that it was Speaker John Boehner and our Majority Leader Eric Cantor who said we will not allow the government to go into chaos because we don't pass a debt limit. And I believe it became a very important attribute early on, 18 months ago, of the President and the new Republican leadership of working together. And the resolution was one that they all worked together. We can all look back and say we didn't like it, but it did become law, and we are there. Thank you very much for the comment, Mrs. Slaughter.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for an opportunity to speak. I didn't vote for sequester, and I expect none of us did, so I don't feel any ownership of it at all. But I do know what we can do about it, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Van Hollen, God bless him, is going to come up for the 4th time and try to get his amendment made in order. And that would do away with sequester and save us an awful lot of money with cuts to agriculture subsidies and oil companies and others instituting the Buffett rule. I do hope that we can find it in our hearts today to put that in order. The 4th time for the ranking member of the Budget Committee to come to rules and ask for an amendment is a little bit embarrassing, so I hope we'll be able to do that. Thank you for the time. Did the lights just go out?
You know what? something.
Have we been sequestered? 10% of the lights are
I told you to stop talking about sequestration.
I have a little trouble. They say, but Hal is from my hometown in Kentucky, and Nita and I have been buddies forever, so I'm glad to see you
Yeah,
both.
good to see you.
Well, that may be a precursor. Mrs. Slaughter and I were before the committee this morning asking, House Administration asking for our budget for this year, this next year, and we may have just gotten an answer. I hope we paid our bills. We're a support organization.
Otherwise, we're going to have to take up collection.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I engage in the political spin of the day, would you mind if I ask you some specific questions about the bill that's actually before us? I do have about three. It has been, actually, I have the first was the most important question. Mr. Chairman, I would wonder if your friend and acquaintance from back in the good old days, if you actually have any stories that we could use and be successful here.
The gentleman does. I'm not sure how successful they'd be, and I do not find those germane to today's argument. But I will say this, that with respect to that, we have mutually assured destruction of each other in mind. So thank you for checking on that, Rob.
Well,
I'll give you his business card.
We'll talk to you in the hall afterwards.
See, I'm in trouble, Blake. Thank you.
Hal, this CR and some of the media reports, I think, was inaccurately described as adding $7 to $10 billion to the current CR levels. I understand that is not accurate to that. But you do shift, or at least allow, the shifting of some funds into the operation and maintenance of the military. If you could just simply tell me what you actually do in the shifting or allowing the shifting of those funds, and perhaps what would be the offsets that were put into the plus-up for O&M?
Yeah, essentially, unless we pass the DOD appropriations bill that we've included in this bill, if we don't do that and they stay under the old straight-out CR, they're going to run short of operations and maintenance account money. So what the bill does is shift money, as the bill that passed the House did, shifts money into the operations and maintenance bucket.
Do you have, or maybe one of your staffers has, from whence that money comes to O&M?
The O&M, the department's most important account, would be reduced if we don't do this by about $11 billion. That's because a CR, a plain old CR, keeps each account static. All funding remains at last year's levels. That means important funds are kept from accounts in which they're needed, while billions are given to obsolete programs or ones that should be reduced. For example, a couple of examples. $4 billion in general excess for things like Iraq operations that should be reduced, no longer needed. $500 million, for example, in savings from spare parts that are excess to what they need. The CR, a regular CR, does not allow for new starts.
Yes.
We lose billions more in increased production delays and contract slippage. For example, construction of the next aircraft carrier would be pushed back a year. Construction of new destroyers would be halted. 17 hospitals, which are needed to treat our wounded warriors, would not be built unless we do this. Things like that. The defense budget is a very fluid account, more fluid than any other of the government, because you've got so many things going on at one time. And year-old divisions of money, which a regular CR would provide, would take away the department's ability to spend money where they need it rather than where they would be made to do it under the old law.
So this misrepresentation on part of the media, the $7 to $10 billion, that's roughly what you're going to allow the flexibility. That's the number roughly that you're putting back into O&M for the military to put where they wish to put. That's roughly what we're talking
flexibility.
about. Then
Let me mention briefly, too, Bill Young is in the room, Chairman Young. He's the author of the defense bill that we're incorporating in the CR, his subcommittee, which he chairs, and which was approved also by the Senate committee. It's a refreshed, new look at how DOD wants and needs to spend the money they get, giving them flexibility to move monies around to fit today's needs.
Do you then foresee this kind of shift, not necessarily a plus-up, but a shift of the O&M budget as helping lessen the impact of some of the large civilian furloughs that may be threatened within the defense community for their civilian employees? Will this give them some flexibility to play around with that concept?
This bill does not address the sequestration problem. It will give them flexibility to try to absorb sequestration costs better than they could have otherwise. But it will by no means solve the sequestration hit on defense.
But just in this one area then of furloughs, sans this change, this appropriation that would be attached to the CR, there would be very little opportunity for them to try and move some money around to mitigate that kind of a condition. This gives the military, as I understand it, the flexibility to see if they can put some area, some mitigation into the impact that would have, or not. Am I inaccurate in that?
Are you talking about contract employees?
Civilian workload that would be maybe furloughed. Does this give them some flexibility to play with the furloughs?
I don't think it would have any impact. Each agency has to implement the sequestration.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't believe that it would be of any help in the area you're talking about.
All right. Those were the specifics I had in that. Just so I can play the games we've done before. First of all, I do like one other element of this, the actual military construction that will be taking place. Without passing these measures to give the authorization for military construction to take place, there are some construction efforts at some of our bases, which I know have been approved, they've been funded, they just need the authorization to do it. The F-35, for example, will be made, perhaps two less than we had planned on it. They will be bedded down at certain installations. Those installations need to have the facilities ready and prepared to accept the bedding down of those F-35s. Without the amendment that you put in here on the military construction, some of those construction needs that are going to be essential would not possibly have been able to take place. So the planes would come and we simply would not be prepared to accept them and to put them. So I do appreciate specifically the military construction aspect, which I know is going to make a big difference. Mr. Chairman, I did vote against sequestration, and I find out saying I told you so has no particular value or helpfulness to it. I voted twice for a change to solve the problem of sequestration, and our good friends over in the Senate chose not to deal with that issue whatsoever. I find no joy in that fact as well. Although I will tell you, the last time I went home, I was accosted in the men's room by three individuals. Now, I'm not a public person to begin with, but I have to admit, talking to people in the men's room in the airport is somewhat difficult for me to do. Two of the people were very positive and thanked me for what I was doing, and the third was basically a jerk and said, all of Congress fails. And I would have left it at that had he not waited at the door to pounce on me as soon as I left the men's room, and simply once again said his complaint that everything in Congress had failed. And I tried nicely, I wasn't nice at all, to let him know that there was two houses to Congress and that I was tired of being held accountable for the incapacity of Senator Reid to actually do his job over on the Senate side. We had taken those votes, we had done our issues. And so I'm a little bit tired of all of the spin that's coming on here, much of which is far over the top. But I do appreciate you bringing this particular bill here. This will solve a significant problem that will face us at the end of this month if you do not. This, even though I'd hope that there'd be more flexibility in the O&M budget, but this does provide military construction, which is desperately needed, and will solve problems that we cannot put off if it were not included here. And I appreciate you for putting those particular efforts. I also appreciate you doing this for the military, and I can see a reason why you would add these and perhaps not some of the others. If this were the first reduction that the military was asked to take with sequestration, I would basically say, it's a big deal, live with it. But it is not. This is basically the third cut in the last 5 years our military has faced. The first two cuts, depending on how you want to count it, are somewhere between $700 and $900 billion, and this is another, sequestration is another $500 billion on top of that. It is different. The military component of sequestration is different than the rest of it. And I think you should, in our rhetoric, we should clarify that there is a specific difference. And the fact that you are putting these appropriation bills on the CR is an effort to try and mitigate the impact of this third reduction in the military. Not the first and second, because we've already faced those reductions and faced the problems they have faced, but this third one. And so it's appropriate of what you are doing, and I appreciate you actually bringing this bill here. And I thank you for trying to answer at least those three questions that I had that were legitimately to the issue at hand. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to Mr. Bishop.
I think you'll have another chance. There will be people that are going to give you all sorts of opportunity. I've yielded back.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern?
Well, out of courtesy, I'll let the gentlelady respond.
I was just going to make an important point because I certainly support.
See, I told you so.
I certainly support what our chairman did with the defense bill and MILCON, military construction bill. But I also want to remind you, because I heard your concern, I was talking to Congressman Fleischman just a short time ago, and many people are not as aware of the very critical defense work that our labs are doing, such as at Oak Ridge, and there are many in California. I won't go into great detail, but I think it's important, even if many people don't feel the passion about the National Institutes of Health cuts or education or Head Start or pre-K or air traffic controls. I can go on and on. But if you're focused on defense, we have to be concerned about the energy and water bill and the impact on the critical work that's being done in our labs directly related to our defense work as well. And I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady, and let me just say a couple of things, just for the record. I know we're here about the continuing resolution, but I do want to say just a couple of things about sequestration, since it was brought up a couple of times. Unless I'm missing something, in the 113th Congress, the Republicans have yet to bring a bill to the floor in the House to deal with sequestration. And if I'm reading the news correctly, I think it was last week that the Senate actually had a bill that got 51 votes, but the Republicans insisted on the 60-vote margin. So, I mean, we have been missing opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to try to fix this. And while I appreciate the great work that the DoD and the VA do, and I think it's good that they've got flexibility to try to deal with this sequestration in the continuing resolution, I guess my question is, why weren't the other appropriations bills, why won't other appropriations bills receive special treatment under this continuing resolution? Why just these two?
Well, these two bills were agreed upon by the House and Senate. And they address what I consider to be the most dangerous matters not to deal with. We can't send, for example, one of our aircraft carrier groups to the Middle East now. And I'm sure there are people in the world who are taking note of those types of things. Readiness and operations of our military is at stake here. And there's nothing more dangerous, I think, or in need of fixing than the inability of the military to be able to move with the times, and that's why these two bills.
Yeah, and I guess, if we're not going to deal with sequestration, I mean, I would have thought that we would have provided more flexibility for these other agencies and departments, because they do get to the heart of another part of our national security, and that is, people who are just trying to survive in this country. Under sequestration, I'm reading a report here that from Joel Berg, who's the executive director of the New York City Coalition Against Hunger. And he talks about the fact that the sequester would remove 600,000 mothers and infants from WIC. And that's the Women's, Infants, and Children's Program, which provides medically designed nutrition supplements to low-income pregnant women and children under 5. The program reduces hunger and obesity, has prevented more than 500,000 babies from dying at birth. The sequestration will also result in cuts to programs like the federally assisted senior meals program, like Meals on Wheels, and it would serve estimated 4 million fewer meals to senior citizens. I go on and on and on, but these cuts are not just numbers and programs. I mean, there are real people behind them, and we're trying to get out of this difficult economy, and there are so many people who are living in this country, who are stuck in poverty, who are hungry, who don't know where their next meal is going to come from, and who do not like the idea that they have to rely on government assistance to try to get them through these difficult times, but without it, quite frankly, would find themselves, at an even worse disadvantage. I mean, I'm worried that by not addressing sequestration here, that we are, we're just kind of turning our heads while some of these cuts go into play that are going to be devastating to people. There are a lot of poor people in this country who wake up every day not wondering what's going to happen in the Middle East. They're wondering whether or not they're going to have enough food to put on the table. And I would just urge, I regret that we're kind of in this spot that we're in right now. I appreciate the work that both my colleagues are doing to try to usher a continuing resolution to the floor, but I think that I think that this response is inadequate given what the needs of our nation are. National security includes more than just the number of soldiers we have in our military, the number of weapons we have in our arsenal, the number of military bases. It also includes people being able to get through their life here in the United States, and there are a lot of people that are struggling. And this continuing resolution, unfortunately, does not, as far as I can see, address the shortfalls that will occur in these other departments and other agencies. I don't know if I'm missing something here.
Let me respond again. In this bill, we provide for authority for any agency to request to reprogram funds within an account or even transfer money from another account.
So the request reprogramming, would it come back to Congress for us to approve, or how would?
It comes back to Congress to be approved by the committee, and that's a routine thing. We do that every day to allow agencies to reprogram money from one account to another. There's a limit on the amount.
Right,
but that's in the bill and in the practice of the Congress and these agencies. For example, we provide a contingency of up to $3 billion to assist WIC under the anomalies that we've written into the bill, which provide an exception, an addition to the CR. Now, under one of these anomalies, we assure continuation of the food stamp, the SNAP contingency fund from within existing financing.
Yeah, I know the food stamp was exempt from the sequestration.
To be available in case of a shortfall in the WIC supplemental feeding program. Anyway, what I'm saying to you is there's ample authority in the CR that we're proposing that would allow agencies to ask for reprogramming. Now, if they don't want to ask,
and I think if every agency went through this whole reprogramming process, if things weren't chaotic enough as they are right now, that would be even more chaotic. I guess my point is this, that the very people who government needs to be there for are the people who are going to be hit the hardest by this sequestration. And I'll go back and look at the continuing resolution, but I'm not convinced yet that this solves those problems. And I think people ought to just keep that in mind. I'm not blaming you, Mr. Chairman. You got to deal with the cards that you're dealt. But I think that this process when all is said and done, if we don't fix this soon, you're going to see an increase in poverty. You're going to see people fall through the cracks, more hungry people in this country. You know what? And if people aren't moved by the moral obligation, it's going to cost us a lot more money down the road. Avoidable health care costs, kids who don't learn in school. I mean, lost productivity. I can go on and on and on. But that's what I worry about, is that we're doing this. We're going through this kind of numbers game, and my worry is that the people who are going to be hurt the most are the people who can least afford it. So I appreciate the gentleman's comments.
Gentlemen, will you agree?
I'm happy to yield.
I think we all can agree we want to get something better than sequestration on the books. It's a silly, stupid, mindless way of cutting spending, but it does cut spending. But that's another day. Sequestration is another time. What I'm asking you here today is to approve the bill to continue funding of the government through.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments. Thank you.
Gentleman yield his time. Thank you very much. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I question and make comments to our distinguished chairman and ranking member, my favorite chairman and my favorite ranking member in Congress, since I serve on their committee.
You can talk about
all
you want.
I actually have three chairmen, but I do tell them, there's the big chairman and the other two. This is the big chairman. I know where I'm more likely to live the rest of my life. It's more likely to be on Mr. Rogers' committee. But seriously, I did want to report one thing as we slide into our contention. I was a little bit late, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to tell you why quickly. I was with a room full of very happy Indians, and they were very happy because of what this committee did last week to facilitate in a very bipartisan fashion the consideration of the Violence Against Women Act. They particularly asked me to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank every member of this committee that made it possible for the House to consider that and move forward in a bipartisan fashion. So every now and then we actually do good things around here. Actually, more than every now and then, I would say. Let me begin by reading something that I think kind of puts the issue in perspective. I do not often quote the communications director, the press secretary for the President of the United States, Mr. Carney, but I thought he had something interesting to say. He was talking about the continuing resolution, and he said, but the issue here is on the continuing resolution and the funding of the government. We certainly support the idea that, as the President said from here, that we should not create another crisis on top of this one, another manufactured showdown, that Congress ought to pass a CR without drama, as it has a half a dozen times since April of 2011. You probably didn't know it was that many times because there was no drama around it, and to do so, to do that in a way that's practical and non-political and consistent with the levels of the Budget Control Act. I want to commend the chairman for doing exactly that, trying to get us through a difficult time without a lot of drama and way ahead of schedule. So we're not here at the very last moment, twisting in agony. I do appreciate very much that you've respected the will of the President and the Congress and stuck to the sequester levels. It's an idea advocated by the President, passed by the Congress. My good friend here was right to say and point out he was happy not to be associated with it. I will point out for the record, though, had we not done that, the cuts would have been a lot worse. You don't raise the debt ceiling, you're looking at a 40% cut in everything immediately. And so if we're agonizing over sequester, think what the agony would have been had that agreement not been arrived at by all parties, including our Speaker, obviously the Leader of the Senate, the President of the United States. Sometimes you do things you might not like to do to avoid something worse, and I think in that case that would have been what happened. I think, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Big Chairman, the thing I like about this, I'm like everybody here, I'd like to have more flexibility and do more, but this is pretty simple. You've taken something that we agree upon in a bipartisan sense, in a bicameral sense. You've put it in there. It's our most pressing issues, national defense. You've tried to minimize the level of controversy here, the anomalies that you lay out in the bill. I think there's 80 of them. There have been 600 in previous ones, so you've been pretty tight, kept this very clean. live within the limits that we have, and you're trying to move it and give the other body time to act as well, and knocked off this. I'd like to ask you this, and I may be jumping ahead, and I shouldn't ask you to speculate on the Senate, but assuming we move this through as written, won't the Senate have an opportunity to move their own version of the CR? And if they want to add some other things, as my friend on the other side of the aisle suggests perhaps they should, that I might well be happy if they did, they will have the opportunity to do that. And if they move quickly, then wouldn't we have the opportunity to conference, and you could look at what they had offered, and they could look at what we had offered, and we could sort of perhaps even get a little bit further down the road than even your very fine proposal?
Well, the gentleman's correct. The Senate can do whatever they want to do. We had more or less conferenced. We passed 7 of these 12 bills, as you know, on the floor of the House. The Senate failed to pass any. But the Senate committee and our subcommittees went ahead and tried to iron out the differences anyway on, and I think they finished like 7 of those subcommittee bills, 2 of which we're putting in this CR. So yes, they could add some of those bills in if they saw fit and send it back over here. Who knows what they will do, but we will consider whatever they send back.
I'm going to give my good friend from New York an opportunity to comment as well.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, my good friend, Mr. Cole, who has such thoughtful, responsible solutions to problems. And I just would like to remind you, because as the distinguished chairman said, there was bicameral cooperation on several bills. So in addition to the military, to defense bill and the MilCon, my recollection was Commerce, Justice, State, and Homeland Security, which are providing critical needs. So before Mr. McGovern, I was talking about education and health care and the National Institutes of Health, but I don't understand why just defense and MilCon are part of the CR when there was bicameral agreement on, according to my records, and you said there were 7, which is even better, but Commerce, Justice, State, and Homeland. This is before the sequester. It certainly would have made a better package if we could have more of the bills that were agreed on as part of the CR. So I'm not sure why that didn't happen.
Would it be fair to say the Senate will have an opportunity to do that if it chooses to? There's an argument to be made here not to put too much from one side and look like we're trying to jam it down, but I like the idea, if we can get this done early, of a real process going back and forth between the House and the Senate, and something that sort of begins to vaguely resemble normal order, which we all would like to see restored around here.
I happen to agree that this bicameral process is good. I want to make 2 points. Number one, it already took place on defense and MilCon, and according to my records, it took place on Commerce, Justice, State, and Homeland. But all of that package in the CR, and I think it's good that we're trying to pass a CR, does not do anything. There is no language getting rid of the sequester. Everyone that has come and testified at these hearings, no matter which side of the aisle, has made it clear that the sequester would cause devastating disaster.
Mr. Chairman, did you have anything you wanted to add? Just on the idea of the Senate potentially adding things in.
Well, we'll consider whatever the Senate sends back to us. I've had a chance to meet with Senator Mikulski, the new chairman of the committee over there, and Senator Shelby, the ranking Republican on the Senate side of the committee, and of course Anita Lowy. Of those 4, 3 are brand new to these jobs. So we've met together and we've determined that we want to get back to regular order, all 4 of us, and do things the right way. That's why I'd like to see us get this bill over with, so fiscal 13 is behind us, and we can begin to focus, as we are already, on fiscal 14. We're starting the hearings on fiscal 14 already. we'll have 150 hearings getting ready for the 14 bills. So the sooner we get this business over with, the better it will be.
Well, I just, to pick up on the phrase my good friend Mr. McGovern used, Mr. Chairman, you do only get to play the cards that are dealt to you. And I don't think any of us think you were dealt a particularly easy hand to play. And I think in this bill, where you've taken care of our most pressing national security concerns, where you folded in work that the two bodies have agreed upon in a bipartisan fashion, and where you've left open the possibility for the Senate to do the same, and hopefully the time for them to do the same, that we can take a step back toward the process that I know we'd all like to see happen. I want to add one other thing. You've been very generous with your time, Mr. Chairman, as always. To my friend, Mr. Bishop and I have very similar circumstance. I have Tinker Air Force Base. He has Hill Air Force Base. We both have large civilian workforces that do critical work for the country. We both have a concern. While I think you were commendably cautious and pointing out these sequester cuts will take place, and they will. I mean, I think that's something my friends need to understand. It's written into law. We can redistribute. We can do a lot of things. We tried to do that twice. I wish a lot of people that were concerned about it now had been concerned about it last May or last December. Didn't have to be our way, but they did need to enter into negotiation. That wasn't done, and we're here. But, we do have a possibility going forward of recapturing some of the work of last year, and it's because of your work. But in the defense area, I am particularly pleased to see that this budget does put over $10 billion back into operations and maintenance. Now, where the Air Force and the Army and the Navy and Marines will choose to spend that, I don't know, and then they have to make those decisions. But we have a better chance under this thing for what I know you and I would like to see happen, which is the minimal disruption of civilian workforces, than we would under just a clean CR. I would hope that we move this through, that we give the Senate a chance to act responsibly. They may pick up my good friend's suggestion and add some other things into that. I, for one, would be very happy if they were the things that had been agreed upon last year, as long as they're within the limits of the sequester, and we can do a lot to mitigate this. But this is one of the first constructive steps that I've seen anybody take in the face of this. And, Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you for doing it. And you may have accidentally sparked an outbreak of sanity and regular order. And I don't think it was accidental, but I think it was very well done. And I think you've provided a real service to us to try and get us back and move us in the right direction.
Thank you. Very valued member of my committee.
Yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I've been sniffling over here. I have a cold. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, thank both of you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to include the statement of administration policy.
Without objection.
And in addition thereto, I would like to ask unanimous consent to include a statement from the Congressional Black Caucus regarding the impact of sequestration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rogers, let me begin by pointing out something that I think is particularly good that you and Ms. Lowy achieved along with others on the Appropriations Committee, and that is that the Secretary of Defense is going to be able to provide the government of Israel the necessary procurement funds for the Iron Dome defense program. And I am just 2 weeks ago returning from my 15th trip to Israel, but not only to Israel, but other areas in the Middle East. And in light of all of the instability that's ongoing, I think that this program, as well as the short-range ballistic missile defense programs, are crucial at this time. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the fact that we pulled a carrier out of the Middle East. And I couldn't agree with you more that at a time of inordinate instability in that region, it would seem to me particularly in light of meetings that I had with different officials in the area, that a carrier is maybe one of the few things that Iran clearly understands. My question, and it's the only question that I have, is when this measure passes and it's completed, do you feel if the appropriate authorities make the determination to return a carrier, that this measure will allow or facilitate a carrier being returned to the Middle East? Yeah.
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
the department, has some discretion in how they move their monies around. And they, by the way, too, can ask for reprogramming
Right.
and transfer funds as they see fit, subject to our approval. But this should solve that problem. And, I worry about the inability to send a carrier force to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Because that's of vital importance to us.
Well, I heard you also mention that this will assist in meeting the schedule on the development of an additional aircraft carrier. I see that as vital to defense, but also vital to the jobs in this country. And much of what gets ignored is how many jobs are likely to be provided by virtue of the work that you all have done. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the gentleman, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for coming in late. I was visiting with the folks from ARPA-E, thinking about those investments that we make that come out of your committee and really go on to produce amazing innovations that, but for the work of your committee, would not be produced because there's no money out there in the private sector to fund some of that very basic research. But because I was late, I may have missed some very important things at the beginning. Listening to some of my colleagues' questions, there appears to be a lot of controversy about this bill. I'll ask you, Ms. Lowy, because I know the chairman is here to advocate for the bill. This seems like a step around which we can agree. Am I misunderstanding the nature of an agreement today?
Well, as I said from the outset, there's no question in my mind that Chairman Rogers and I could sit down, put together a continuing resolution that would include all 12 committees, and then send it to the Senate to do its will, come to the Congress in a conference, and we could work it all out. I don't think that the chairman or I, or the both chairman and ranking member in the Senate, would support sequestration because they know it would be devastating. So I think all four of us would like to work something out so we can not have the bill, the continuing resolution, subject to sequestration. So I was very pleased when the chairman made adjustments, took the FY13 bill that was agreed upon by the Senate and the House, and included in the CR. However, since we know every one of the bills will be subject to sequestration, I think it would have been much more productive, much more positive, and I would have enthusiastically supported this effort if the other 10 bills were at the FY13 level. And by the way, it's not always necessarily more money. As the chairman knows, the FY13 defense bill is not more money. They were given the option of flexibility in moving the bill around so it served their important needs to defend our country. So, to make it clear, I support the continuing resolution process. I think it's essential that it be for all 12 bills, and I think it's unfortunate that we're doing it for 2 bills and not the other 10, and I may be mistaken, but I have Commerce, Justice, and State and Homeland Security and there may be others where there was agreement between the House and Senate, because what's critical here, since sequester is the law of the land, all of these bills, at the level they are at in the continuing resolution, will be subject to sequester. And I won't repeat again, devastate education, health care, National Institutes of Health, air traffic control, food and safety inspectors, et cetera. That's why I think there has to be an adjustment to all of the bills.
Perhaps we should have put you and the chairman in that joint select committee together. That I'm very encouraged to hear that the two of you could come together and find that agreement. You know, as this being 2 years and 2 months that I've had a voting card. Of course, I've never gotten to vote on a labor HHS appropriations bill. I've never gotten to offer an amendment to one. I would have said that the process was so problematic that agreement was near impossible, and that I might serve another 2 years and not see that process. But to hear that even with these challenging funding levels set by sequestration, that in your experience you're able to look forward and say, we really are going to be able to come to an agreement. I will tell you that my summer will be a better summer if it's filled with appropriations bills that have been bipartisanly reported out of the Appropriations Committee or coming to the floor.
I just want to clarify, I don't think either Chairman Rogers or myself support sequestration, but regular order with all the 12 bills where we work together and then work with the Senate in a conference, I think is the regular order, the way we've always operated, and I think it would be a very productive process.
But let me make sure I understand, because my experience has just been around operating under these budget caps that the Congress passed and the President signed, that one of the only things we've all seemed to have agreed upon in the 2 years and 3 months, again, I've had.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
The voting card.
Because I mentioned that before. We have already cut $1 trillion for the next 10 years and put caps, before you came in, I mentioned that, caps of $555 billion, and I think this was an important step in the right direction. So to see these potentially devastating cuts, when I think we could work it out so that there's a long-range plan for reducing the debt, but short-term create jobs and get the economy moving again.
Well, as someone... Let me just say this. The name of the game here, or the end product we're after, is a law that stops the shutting down of the government on March 27th. Therefore, everything else, the simpler you can make the bill, the better chance you have of getting that law passed and signed by the President. So we did not include these other bills because it would have greatly complicated and even maybe made controversial a bill that otherwise really is not. If the Senate wants to add something in, we'll take a look at that. But I want to keep the bill as simple as we can to ensure that we pass a bill that becomes law that prevents the shutdown of the government. We can't take that on top of sequestration. Now, this bill is not about sequestration. This is about continuing the funding of the government for the balance of the year, albeit at reduced levels because of sequestration. We can deal with sequestration perhaps later, but for now, we need to keep the government from shutting down.
I'd ask the ranking member, I find that very persuasive, and given all the concerns folks have about whether it's a 5% reduction or in our case an 8.2% reduction or something higher, if we fail to succeed in this effort, we're talking about 100% reductions across these categories, which is why my sense was this is actually an area of agreement. While we all find things that we might like to do differently, or even that we believe we could do better, that at least as it comes to can we succeed by March 28th, this was an area in which we found more agreement than disagreement. Am I reading those tea leaves correctly?
Well, if you're looking directly at me, I will repeat again. I do believe that Chairman Rogers and I and all of our committee members could agree on FY13 bills, and it would be my preference to include in the CR no sequester. then I think we have a very rational plan. We're not cutting education, we're not cutting the National Institutes of Health, we're not cutting the air traffic controllers, we're not cutting food and safety inspectors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of a CR, not closing down the government, we are in total agreement. Supporting defense, supporting Milcon, we're in agreement. I just think the other 10 bills are so important to the health and the national security of our economy. 750,000 jobs, not Nita Lowy. Almost every economist predicted that the sequester, on top of, on those other 10 bills, you're dealing at the continuing resolution level, not FY13 level. The sequester on top of them would be terribly damaging to the economy. And you know the bottom line? When the big hospitals, the research institutes come in and talk to me about the hundreds of millions of dollars they are spending on research, cancer, autism, Alzheimer's, heart, etc. It's not just this groundbreaking research that's going to save lives, it's jobs. You were talking about jobs in the defense bill, both Mr. Bishop and Mr. Cole. I am saying that National Institutes of Health, education, etc., these are jobs in addition to performing critical roles in our society. So we both agree that there should be a continuing resolution. I think we both agree there shouldn't be a sequester. I would like to see a continuing resolution, regular order on all 12 bills, sit with the Senate. We could even agree. Wouldn't that be terrific?
That would be terrific. I'd like to echo, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member's enthusiasm for regular order on the appropriations process over the next few months. I'm a big believer. Now, in fairness, I know Mr. Cole has a lot of affection for the Appropriations Committee. As much affection as I have for you, I value my opportunity to participate in that process, too. Very difficult to do through a continuing resolution, but you have inspired me by your belief that at least at the committee level, you all can come together and report out those bills. And I look forward to seeing those things on the floor of the House. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank both of you for being here today. I know you're passionate about issues that aren't contained within the CR, but I will tell you this: I'm new as a member on armed services, and listening to all the testimony from our Joint Chiefs and those that have come to testify, they led me to believe that as bad as sequestration is for them, the CR is even worse in so many different ways. And so I was so happy to see the fact that we're utilizing MILCON and appropriations as it relates to DOD, but also for our veterans. Because when you look at our troops and those young men and women that volunteer to serve us, to keep us free, and we're putting them at risk because we don't have the funds in the proper categories, which is crazy, but the way CRs work, I didn't realize this until I got up here 2 years ago. You could be funding this piece of paper if it costs $100, and guess what? They don't need it anymore. You're still funding this piece of paper at $100. And they have critical needs as it relates to readiness. I have a son that's currently at the National Training Center with the 1st Infantry Division. And they had to cut back on the amount of equipment that they take, the amount of time they're going to be out there, the amount of ammunition that they can expend, because they're fearful because of the CR, that they're not going to have the money and have the ability for their superiors to put it in places that they need it. Florida Army National Guard won't be able to fly their helicopters for training missions, which puts us in two distinct areas of, one is national defense, but the other is to respond to critical issues that affect us because of natural disasters. If these men and women can't fly, can't keep their skills honed, then we put them at risk when they're called into action, whether it's at a hurricane or whether it's in a foreign country to defend this nation's interest. So CR, particularly what you're doing in this one, to give that flexibility to our leaders that are entrusted with our sons and daughters in keeping us safe. For the first time, I'm proud the fact that we're doing a CR. I'd much rather see us pass all the appropriation bills, see the Senate do the same, and obviously get us out of this rut that we're in. But this is the first time that I think that we're actually doing the right thing by those that have volunteered to defend us in every way, that are willing to give the last measure. So while I agree with you, it may not go far enough in a lot of areas, but it certainly is going in the right direction for those that are critically important to us and those that have served us, I think, Mr. Chairman, did you mention that some of this goes into Milcon? Is there also some going to VA to help?
Oh, sure, absolutely. As I mentioned, there are 17 hospitals that need to be constructed that cannot be unless we do this, for example.
And that's part of what the CR does, unless you have the anomalies in reference to what you're talking about here. You can't do any new starts. Am I correct on?
You can't what?
Can't have any new starts to programs.
That's correct. You can't. DOD cannot do a new start under a regular CR. They have to have special permission.
Yes, ma'am.
And there's also, staff reminds me, almost 200 other construction projects that can go forward only if we do this bill in Milcon.
200 construction projects.
Almost 200.
Across the United States.
Yeah.
Adds jobs.
I'm sorry.
It adds jobs.
Adds jobs. Construction work.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you for your passionate statement, and I want to clarify again that I am supportive of including the defense bill and the Milcon bill. But let me give you a few examples, because what's really happening is the other 10 bills are operating at last year or the year before's level, where we are updating the defense bill and Milcon to this year's level, which is so very important. I had a group of parents in my office, as I do all the time, but these were parents with children who have autism. The research that is being done is extraordinary. In fact, the president, I believe, just last week talked about a focus on the brain and investing in the brain. Dr. Collins of the National Institutes of Health, who's done amazing work. If we are not investing in the National Institutes of Health at the level they need for whether it's autism, whether it's Alzheimer's or heart, or you can diabetes research where we've made so much progress, then these are not just jobs. There are lives that will be lost. So I just want to emphasize again that what the chairman did was important, but he just didn't go far enough, because these kids don't get back those years. The opportunity to get research done and save lives and create jobs is absolutely essential.
So I think, though, we agree that the CR is the worst possible thing that we can do as to how
Other than
as to not doing a CR. I absolutely agree, but the regular order portion of it, and I think what you're both committed to, is the process to actually bring forward appropriation bills and pass them, and hopefully the Senate will do the same thing. Not overly optimistic.
Will the gentleman yield?
Absolutely.
Well, that's the problem. We passed all 12 of these appropriations bills through the House committee, and we passed 7 of them on the floor of the House. Meantime, the Senate did nothing. They refused to take up a single appropriations bill. So it takes 2 to tango under our Constitution, and we were doing a solo dance. If the Senate, and that's been going on now for 2 straight years, they just simply refuse to pass a budget, and they refuse to pass a single appropriations bill. So that puts us into a CR, a continuing resolution. So unless the Senate wakes up and does their job on appropriations, we'll be back in a CR next year.
And that goes to the issue that the gentlelady's talking about in regards to programs that are important across America. Won't get fixed unless, A, we pass the appropriation bills here, but more importantly then, after we do our business, that the Senate actually does it. So if I'm going to be angry at someone, you just have to walk down the hall under the rotunda and go on the other side. And those are the folks that really need to get off the dime and help us help America. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member.
Yield back. Mr. Webster?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Like that term, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
it's got a ring to it.
Can we get the stories now? Never mind. Mr. Webster, you're recognized.
I was listening with interest. I think I understand what you're saying. If we were able, Mr. Chairman, to get this CR combination appropriation act out of the way, then that's our best opportunity to get back to regular order. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, absolutely. We're already holding hearings on fiscal 14 to try to construct a bill for fiscal 14. It's a year-long effort, but we cannot focus on that until we get rid of fiscal 13, which this will do. Yes.
I had one other question about sequestration. I want to make sure I understand these terms because in the report that the CBO did, there are some adjustments in overseas contingency, emergency requirements, and disaster relief. Aren't those numbers, I'm not going to say they're just numbers pulled out of a hat. I'm sure there's some discussion that goes behind those. But, Chairman, aren't those numbers that we insert, like disaster relief? I mean, we didn't know Sandy was going to happen, and so we put in a number, and it's there. And then if there's some other special necessity, we come back and adjust that or do a supplemental. Is that true for all of those numbers, those for overseas contingency, emergency requirements, and disaster relief? Don't we, from time to time, supplement those?
Yeah, those accounts are outside the budget caps.
Right. So in here, they are sequestered. And so everybody talks about the $85 billion, but it's not true. There are some monies out there, significant amounts of monies. They're being sequestered. However, they're only almost like placeholders, it seems like. Now, I may be wrong, but they may be placeholders. So when we sequester that money, we don't really know, even before it was sequestered, what the need would be. It's there, and it seems like it was Sandy or other overseas operations, when there's been a necessity, we've come back and done something else in order to supplement whatever it is. Isn't that true?
Well, suffice it to say, those were appropriated funds and therefore subject to sequestration.
Right, and they are, but what I'm saying is, it's not like some fixed number that we're getting ready to spend that money. It's relying on some occurrence happening out there that would be necessitating those needs. And in some cases, like disaster relief, we immediately exceed the amount there and we come back and do a supplemental. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
So those sequestered dollars really are not part, I mean, when we say $85 billion, it's really, some of those numbers are being sequestered, which are only, in my thought, placeholders for whatever happens.
Well,
so what they're showing is, it's really the numbers about $59 billion in discretionary budget authority that's being sequestered, not the 85.
Yeah, these are sequestration matters. We were prepared to do the CR for the balance of the year. We can talk about sequestration tomorrow. But right now, I want to get a bill on the floor to stop the government from shutting down. And we can talk about those things later.
Yes. So like you said, when we get this out of the way, the potential of us getting back to regular order is way higher than if we spend our time bouncing bills back and forth that we know probably the Senate is not going to take.
Yeah, I want to do 12 individual bills.
Yeah.
Bring them separately to the floor, let members amend and debate in the old-fashioned way. Send a bill to the Senate, let them send a bill back. We do a conference with the Senate. Everybody has their day in court. That's what I want to get back to. We can't do that unless
But the
both
potential of
parties-
doing those for a 6-month wouldn't of time is pretty low. I mean, wouldn't you say? For doing it for the rest of the year, the 6 months is pretty low of getting back to regular order for that. So that time passes. Far better just to do what you're proposing here and then start on the 2014
Yeah, we want to
appropriation.
get fiscal 13 business over with.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
May just respond because there seems to be such reasonable exchanges here today. All we have to do is get together and have common sense negotiations, and we can get rid of sequestration. So I agree with the chair. We should go ahead with the continuing resolution. I would like to do it for the 12 bills. And then the reasonable people here could orchestrate a discussion, a meeting, where we could all agree in getting rid of sequestration, because whether it's defense, military, the NIH, the Homeland Security, air traffic controllers, food safety inspectors, everyone agrees it would be a disaster. So, Mr. Chairman, maybe we've made some progress here, and we can have a meeting to, in a bipartisan way, do away with sequestration.
Thank you. Don't limit it to reasonable people. I'd like to stay here. Gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to my good friends, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Lowy, for your excellent work. I wanted to just follow up on what Congressman Hastings, my Florida colleague, asked about the Iron Dome program, and it's good that we're getting that DOD back with funds, and they'll be able to help with the Iron Dome program. I wanted to ask further about the foreign assistance aspect of our economy, and just to confirm that there's nothing in this bill that would give the Obama administration the flexibility, the euphemism that they use to fund UNESCO or any agency in the UN that allows Palestine to be recognized as a country, and it doesn't have anything about weapons aid. You know, the Secretary of State Kerry's been going around promising weapons aid to Syria rebels, for example. We're so relieved that he said the vast majority of this will not be going to extremists. That's certainly a cause for relief. And nothing in there for aid to the Morsi government
There's no policy matters in the bill.
No policy, no change whatsoever. Thank you. Just wanted to confirm.
And the funding for Iron Dome is included.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas.
I thank the chairman for the recognition. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lowy, I appreciate you being here and spending so much time with us. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate what you're trying to do with the CR and the attached appropriations bill for the Department of Defense and military quality of life. I, for one, would have liked to have seen us go a little bit farther in some of the attempts to pare down what I consider to be excessive federal spending. We're all familiar with the numbers in the discretionary spending. We're all familiar with the numbers in entitlement spending. I'd really like to see us tackle some of the, what I call imaginary numbers that are in the Affordable Care Act. And I realize that this was not the time and place to have that fight, but I do want to encourage you. There are and we've done some of the work in our committee, but there are lots of places where we can look in this law as it's rolled out and the implementation thereof where the dollars are going to be easier to contain before they get out the door. And it is one of our, as I see it, one of the main things we can do for the future generations of Americans is do the correct oversight on the implementation and curtail some of the spending that is contained therein, because it is really unlike anything anyone has ever seen before. I want to thank Mr. Hastings for bringing the Statement of Administrative Policy for us. The fact that it doesn't contain a veto threat, Mr. Chairman, I think is good news for you. They can be as seriously concerned or deeply concerned as the language they use. They can be deeply concerned, but they're apparently in agreement with you that they want to see a CR passed and signed into law, which is why I appreciate the fact that you're not waging the kind of fight that I would perhaps wage if I were in your position on the Affordable Care Act. But one of these days we're going to have that, and I think those days are not too far off. I do want to say, it is interesting on the sequester side, the monies from the prescription drug user fee agreements that were hammered out in a bipartisan fashion last spring and last summer. The President signed into law in July. It is a mystery to me why these dollars, which are brought by industry to the Food and Drug Administration to allow them to simply do their job, why those dollars have to be put into some holding account and not used. It does seem strange. In fact, it seems terribly inefficient to not use those dollars for the purposes for which they were intended, and I hope your committee can look into that and perhaps provide, if not some relief, some clarity in the thinking of the Food and Drug Administration, or I guess more appropriately, the Office of Management of the Budget that has required those funds be held up. But I thank you all for being here today. I appreciate the work you're doing. I'd like us to be a little tougher, but right now I understand what we're doing. I yield back.
Yield back. So thank the Chairman and the Ranking Member for coming up here and presenting this bill to us. We appreciate you spending your time with us. And at this time, if you'd like to go away, I'm sure you're happy to do so.
Thank you, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
dismissed.
Thanks for the good welcome here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we make the transition, I'll invite the three members who have amendments to which they wish to talk to us, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Hulskamp, Mr. Breitenstein, if they'd come up and take seats. Mr. Van Hollen, you may have to just bring an extra chair up if you would. All right, without going on protocol, Mr. Van Hollen, you are a ranking member. We'll go with you. Then Mr. Hulskamp. I think you're the senior member on the committee. Then Mr. Breitenstein in that order. Mr. Mr. Van Hollen, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. Thank you and Ranking Member Slaughter and all the members of the committee for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. The last time I was here, I made a proposal that I thought you guys should take me up on, which is that if you made the amendment to replace the sequester in order, that I wouldn't be back to the Rules Committee for a very long time. So you only have yourselves to blame for the fact you have to listen to me again here today. That's right. So listen, Mr. Chairman, for the record, this is now the fourth time this year that we have asked for a simple up or down vote on the floor of the House of Representatives on a proposal to replace the sequester. The sequester, of course, kicked in on March 1st. And unless we do something about it, it will progressively create more and more disruptions in the economy. And according to the independent, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, if left in place throughout this calendar year, will result in the loss of 750,000 jobs. In other words, we will have 750,000 fewer American jobs in this country by the end of December than we would otherwise if we don't replace this sequester. In addition to that, last week the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Bernanke, said that if the sequester remains in place, we can expect to see economic growth this calendar year reduced by 1/3. So lots of jobs lost, economic disruptions that will become increasingly obvious as time goes on, and you would think, Mr. Chairman, that we would at least have a chance to vote on a plan to avoid those 750,000 in job losses and the disruption to the economy. And so very briefly, again, what this proposal does is replace the sequester in a way that achieves the same amount of deficit reduction, but it does so in a way that doesn't result in the loss of 750,000 jobs and economic disruption, because it targets those cuts over a period of time and also closes lots of tax breaks. For example, it would eliminate the subsidies for big oil, the taxpayer subsidies for big oil, something that was proposed by former President Bush, and it would apply the Buffett rule so that folks making more than $2 million would still be able to take advantage of some of their deductions and exemptions, but they would at least pay an effective tax rate of 30%. So we at least think that that is an alternative worthy of consideration by this House in order to avoid that job loss and that economic disruption. And we would ask that you simply allow this people's House to work its will and make that amendment in order. And if people want to vote no and have it go down, that's a choice that people can make in the light of day. And people should be on record on that. But at the very least, people should be willing to stand up and take a vote on that issue, on a plan to avoid the sequester. So I would ask for the fourth time this year, Mr. Chairman, that you and the members of this committee make that amendment in order.
Thank you, Mr. Helskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have amendment number 4, version 1. I'd like to yield to my colleague from Oklahoma, and I'll make some comments when he is complete.
Thank you. In Oklahoma, we have a very brave governor who is resisting the expansion of Medicaid, and she is also resisting the creation of the Obamacare exchanges. We have universities that are working extensively hard to preserve their religious liberties, and we have businesses that are working to preserve their religious liberties. And what we'd like to do is propose an amendment that would defund a lot of this implementation and a lot of these problems that are keep coming up in the state of Oklahoma. Certainly there are IRS agents that are working to continue collecting taxes for the implementation of Obamacare. There are Health and Human Services rulemakers that are continuing to make rules day by day. The businesses in Oklahoma and I'm sure in Kansas are having problems, not knowing what the next day holds as far as their rules go. So we'd like to unfund the rulemakers. We'd also like to unfund the enforcement and other items for the implementation of Obamacare as an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up for many of us on the issue of the President's health care plan that passed before I was here, it's certainly not lived up to its promises. Over 2,400 waivers to the provisions of Obamacare, more than 24 lawsuits in reference to the mandate out of HHS. The CPO estimates as well that up to 7 million Americans will not be able to keep their health care coverage as promised, and numerous other things. And this amendment is very simple, Mr. Chairman. We ask for the opportunity to have an up or down vote on continued implementation of the President's health care plan in this CR. So a pretty simple issue that hopefully we would have an opportunity to vote on the floor as we move forward on the CR.
Thank you. I appreciate the three of you for presenting your amendments. Are there any questions to it, Mr. Cole? No questions. Okay. Ms. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say to Mr. Van Hollen again, I certainly appreciate your persistence. I agree with what you're trying to do and say that everybody here who voted last week for the previous question has already voted to continue the sequester and to turn down what it is you were trying to do here. So we're on record already on where we are. There's no reason in the world not to let you have this amendment and do it in a straightforward and honest way. And I've already mentioned before you got here that I hoped as ranking member of the Budget Committee we would pay you the courtesy on your fourth visit of making your amendment in order. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Or maybe fifth. Mr. Nugent? No, sir. Mr. Hastings?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have no question.
You can't cross that fast. Mr. Webster? No questions, Mr. Polis. Ms. Rothleason, Mr. Burgess.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me just briefly say thank you to the gentleman from Kansas and Oklahoma for bringing forward an important concept. And you heard my comments to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. I do think that now is not the time to have this fight, but I very much believe this is a fight which we must have. So I appreciate your enthusiasm, your passion for bringing it forward. I will say the governor of Oklahoma is exactly right in what she's doing, resisting the Medicaid expansion. I've had discussions with the governor of Texas along those lines, and I believe that's someplace where we just need to hold firm. You guys are on the right track. I don't know if this is the place to have the fight, but I appreciate you bringing it up to us today. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. I appreciate your time. Chris, welcome.
Chairman.
Here we go again.
The offer stands. Make this in order, and I'll go away for a while anyway.
Why?
Yeah, I mean,
he said that last
time,
time.
Mr. Chairman. I know. I mean,
said that last
take me up on the offer.
Yeah. I am delighted that you're back up here. As I saw you downstairs a few minutes ago, I extended the offer, and it's still good anytime you want to come up. I'm delighted to see you. We have been kicking around. I don't know when you walked in. I know I walked out a few minutes ago, but we're still kicking around this whole sequestration, CR, how we're going to do things. I think you and I both recognize, and I know Mrs. Slaughter does, that what we're trying to do is to work through a process where we're very open with the American public about where we are, about the needs of the business, to take care of not just the American people, be honest with them about where we're going, but also to make progress. Last weekend, I was at as you know, I go to many children's disability conferences and events. And I ran across a couple moms who said gasoline is double what it was. My SUV, which I have to have for the wheelchair, it's getting hard for us. We need some relief there, too. And I promised her we'd continue to work. We'd try to work together on the issues that would make life better for them. I guess I'm lucky. I have a Down syndrome son, which is different than autism, which is different than cerebral palsy, which is different than a lot of syndromes that people have. And I just, I know the American people are rooting for us, and we're rooting for them to win. And so I thank you, as always, my dear friend, for coming up here, and my other dear friends from Oklahoma and certainly from Kansas. So thank you for taking time to be with us. I've been told that everyone on the committee has had a chance to fully vet you and that you had a chance to challenge us. And we're going to take it that way, and we're going to see what we can do. So thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Thank you, sir.
You're excused at this time, and thank you very much. This now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 933, and I see no further witnesses, so we'll close the hearing, and Chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Vice Chairman Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 933, the Department of Defense, Military Construction and Veterans Affairs, and full year Continuing Appropriations Act 2013, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
I thank the gentleman for her motion and would defer to the gentleman, Mr. Cole, for an explanation of the rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The rule is a closed rule, which is standard on the CR. It's 1 hour of debate, the customary 1 hour debate, divided equally between both sides. Makes a technical correction to the bill requested by the Appropriations Committee, and that's a self-executing measure.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank not only the witnesses that we've had, but also the gentleman for his great work on behalf of his favorite committee, which is the Appropriations Committee. Now hearing the motion, is there any discussion or amendments that would be in order? Gentlewoman.
Yes, I can feel obliged on Mr. Van Hollen's behalf to move that the committee make an order and give necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Van Hollen, number 1, which replaces the entire sequester for calendar year 2013, which would cause deep cuts to domestic priorities and defense, with savings from specific policies that reflect a balanced approach to deficit reduction. This amendment protects our most vulnerable citizens, asks those earning over $1 million a year to contribute a little more, eliminates agriculture direct payments, and cuts subsidies to big oil.
Is there any discussion on this amendment? The chairman does recognize that the amendment that the gentlewoman moves on behalf of Mr. Van Hollen is a consensus choice by the gentlewoman. I also recognize that at a time when we're trying to not raise prices on gasoline, that there would be a substantial rise in price of gasoline, noting that gasoline has doubled under prices under President Obama. We've seen the price of food substantially rise. We've seen cereal, milk, commodities rise as a result of the excessive price of gasoline, and further that we just had a big tax increase under President Obama, and I know that there are calls for increasing taxes further. Brand new revenues estimated to be about $600 billion that would come in this year, and I have seen where the American public are asking us to now do our part to reduce the cost of government, and so I will be voting no on this amendment. So those in favor of the Slaughter Amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. 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 The noes have it. The noes have it. Is there a further amendment?
Yes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 933 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor. Mr. Chairman, this bill entirely skipped the regular process. Members are supposed to have an opportunity to propose changes, but this bill was just written by House Republicans in a back room somewhere, and now we're sending it directly to the floor. Neither the House Appropriations Democrats nor Senate Appropriations supports this bill. In order to give members of the House the chance to approve the bill on the floor, I'm asking my colleagues to support an open rule. It would be one thing if this were a simple CR that changed the date for all programs, but this bill picks winners and losers and makes many changes in current law. It's 269 pages long. Long bill. We know that this bill helps the Pentagon and the VA cope with the cuts from the sequester. I don't have any problem with that. But there's no reason why we can't give the same help to all the other agencies that ensure our homeland security, enforce our laws, keep our food supply safe, help farmers and small businesses, and keep our air and water clean. In addition, this bill, the way it is written, ensures that a lot of people who are poor will suffer even worse consequences as a result of their poverty. I think that is just wrong. If we have an open rule, we can do something about that. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the McGovern amendment.
Further discussion on the McGovern amendment?
Mr. Chairman, can I be heard on the amendment? I appreciate the gentleman's effort to have open rules. I'm a big fan of, particularly in the appropriations process. I am worried that the consequences of not passing this bill, again, is not a 10% reduction or a 15% reduction for those groups in need that the gentleman mentions. It's a 100% reduction. I take the chairman at his word that we're going to have an open process that deals with each line item one by one going forward for the FY 2014 year. But if we don't get this done, and our experience is the Senate needs all the time it can, gentleman remembers the open process we had. The only open process we've ever had on a continuing resolution was the one we had in H.R. 1 2 years ago, and I thought that was a festival of democracy we had here in the House, though it went on day and night for 5 days. This is a shorter bill, and again, MilCon, VA, and DOD all went through an open process. These are the bills that went through the open process, passed this House in a completely open manner last summer. And then just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, in case anyone was confused, this bill does nothing to make anyone's plight worse. This bill takes what is a tough situation for all of Americans, and it makes things better for every veteran, for every man and woman serving in uniform. It does nothing to make anyone's plight worse than current law is today. And I think that's an important distinction. I take the gentleman's point, but an important distinction. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I appreciate the fact that he's for open rules. I wish he'd vote for a couple. It's been a long time since we've had an open rule. And I think this process deserves it. And let me just say one thing. This bill does make many people's lives worse. You know, people who lose WIC, people who lose, nutrition programs, people who quite frankly, are suffering right now as a result of a bad economy, who rely on the federal government, quite frankly, just to get by. The fact that we are not changing this sequester, the fact that we are sitting by and twiddling our thumbs while these cuts go into effect, I think is unconscionable. And I think one of the things that we could at least do, since we have the time, is we ought to have a more open process that my friend says he supports. Let's vote for an open rule. I'll give him the opportunity to. Thank you.
The gentleman makes my point about the controversy that his amendment would add to this bill and the way that it would threaten the passage of the underlying bill. This bill ensures that the communities you're talking about get every penny allowed to them under federal law today. And the gentleman characterizes that as doing them a disservice. As the gentleman knows, if his amendment brings down this bill, those folks get zero.
Tell that to the 600,000 people who lose the benefit.
That is the gentleman makes exactly the point about why it's important that we move this forward in a way that ensures that these dollars continue to go out to these.
I find it stunning that an open process is somehow controversial, but I would urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment.
Well, I appreciate the dialogue, and by the way, we are trying to make sure in this committee we do fully vet and understand and have expert witnesses and allow the testimony. And it's not unusual for us to have 5-hour hearings in the Rules Committee now.
Well, I would even prefer less testimony and more amendments.
Well, that might be a trade-off the gentleman does seek. I would say that in the process that many leaders in this House of Representatives have been attempting for quite some time to make sure that we understood the difference between physical cliff, the difference between CR, the difference between sequestration, and those items which are necessary, including a debt limit. And what we're trying to do in this House is before the last minute to offer a bipartisan, bicameral agreement. We saw both the ranking member and the chairman sit before us, and while they lamented certain parts of where we all are, I think a common sense of purpose to try and do the right thing with what we have. I think we've given plenty of time for the United States Senate to now see what we would do. We will welcome any opportunity to negotiate with them in a conference. And so I urge a no vote on the McGovern amendment. Is there further discussion? The vote now occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those no? No. No. The noes have it. The gentleman asked for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Leitonen? No. Ms. Ross-Leitonen, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Slaughter? Yes. Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The McGovern amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments for the committee today? The motion before us now is on the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Roll call.
Ms. Fox?
Yay.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Leitman?
Aye.
Ms. Ross-Leitman, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter? Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, will be handling for the majority. Mr. McGovern will be handling for the Democrats. I do not anticipate at this time that we will have any further action here at the Rules Committee. I also would advise the gentlewoman that we are interested in working with her on decision-making about the placement of the rule on the floor now that it's passed Rules Committee, the timing of that, and we want to make you updated as we receive information based upon the weather, based upon the floor consideration, based upon the ideas. We will do that tomorrow then. I subject to that final decision. I'm glad that you're right in that loop.
People who don't live way up north like I do are really afraid of that snow.
Well, you know, as best I can tell you, I've heard for years Texans don't know how to drive on 4 inches of snow.
Well, not the people up way up north don't have to either.
The problem is it's the 6 inches of ice that are underneath that we get into trouble. Thank you very much, and to all